We're right on time, and we have until 10 minutes to the hour together. So thank you all so much for joining our panel. I hope you've been having fun joining the main session, and there are other panels in the next today and tomorrow too. So where are you now? You are at the panel, Find Your Words in the Midst of a Crisis. And we could have no better panelists than the three folks that you see in front of you. So let me give them some introductions here, and then we'll jump into the dialogue. And also, we would love, love, love to hear questions from you. So please feel free throughout the dialogue. I'll try to keep my eyes on the command center here so that we can incorporate anything that's on your mind to start thinking about that. So to introduce the panelists, first we have Geraldine Green. She's joining us from Louisville. It's not Louisville, right? It's Louisville, Kentucky. Yeah, pretty good on that?
Yep.
Okay. And she is the Chief Communications and Public Affairs Officer for Yum Brands. That includes KFC, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and Habit Burger Grill, which Alan ate last night for dinner, coincidentally. She is also the chairman and CEO of the Yum Brands Foundation, and formerly of Edelman, Burson Marsteller. She's run her own consultancy. She's a super expert on this topic. Geraldine, thank you so much for joining. Very excited to have you. So next we have, thank you. Next we have Karen, who's joining from HP. She's the Chief Communications Officer for almost the last 5 years, formerly a VP at Broadcom, Sun Microsystems. She did a lot of agency work before that at Uber and Fleischmann Hillard and much more. And Karen, like me, you are a Newhouse grad. So Q's in the house, I know. I was excited to see that. Yay. And then we also have coming in live from San Jose, Alan Marks from ServiceNow. Thrilled to have you, Alan, the Chief Marketing and Communications Officer for ServiceNow, formerly of the Everson Collective, eBay, Nike, Gap, lots of amazing brands in his past. So again, we really couldn't have a more incredible panel of leaders joining us to talk about this topic. So thank you all very much. So let's go ahead and dive in and talk about crisis. And there's certainly been a lot going on in the world and in the United States over the last few months. So maybe we'll start, Alan, with you, and we'll go around the horn here. What does good crisis communications look like?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's keeping it real. It's got to be honest, it's got to be constant, and it's got to be authentic. You know, if we go back to COVID in March, you know, our business, as with everybody, we change very rapidly. You know, we are a global technology company, and so we were able to transition fairly easily and seamlessly around the world. We have about 12,000 employees spread across 85 offices. We also have a lot of remote workers who are working from home already as part of their job. And so that was a fairly seamless transition, but what we've done from the beginning is over-communicate, just constant communications, using our technologies, using our platforms to do live meetings, all hands meetings, making sure we leave a lot of time for Q&A, really leaning into our leadership communications to make sure all of our leaders understood what we were doing and how we're operating. And so I think that's rule number one, you know, keep it real, and you can never communicate enough in a situation like this.
Not the truth. Yeah, no, I think the technology enablement around live virtual town halls with all employees, it's transformative. I really, I've been so heartened by it. It really democratizes the process. And I think as leaders, it helps us make sure we're working on the right stuff for our people, because we can't get on an airplane right now and go talk to our frontline associates. We can connect with them digitally in a democratized way. So love that. Karen, what about for you?
What does great communications look like?
Yeah, in a crisis.
I mean,
yeah.
You know, I think Alan described it really well. I mean, I think the most important thing is to not be surprised when you have a crisis, is to have a really rigorous resiliency plan and emergency response plan. And maybe because we're almost a 90-year-old brand, and we've had many crisis topics, both self-imposed as well as, what happens out in the market. but just not being surprised and making sure that you continue to do black swan activities and that you've got strong protocol, strong alignment across every function that you have. If you're a big global brand like we are, or like Geraldine's brand for sure, HR, IT, operations, CEO, CFO, comms. And I think the biggest thing that we've taken away from whether, we were in a crisis even before all of the current issues around racial and social injustice and the pandemic, we were in the middle of a hostile proxy. And what we found is this really important alignment with employee comms. And I've learned a lot about the importance of, first and foremost, sometimes as communicators, we talk from our head, and the importance of talking from our head and our heart and making sure that there's really a strong empathetic connection, because these issues that are going on they affect people in their homes, in their lives, with their children, with their health, their financials, and so on. So it's, for us, it's the intersection of employee comms and the head and the heart and the way that we communicate.
I love that. I know that's so very true. I think all that corporate language that we all used to complain about, now you have no alternative. You have to be. Your employees will give you immediate feedback. Point. Yeah, I love that. And Geraldine, your brands are very consumer facing, and you have a lot of frontline associates interfacing with the public every day, which I think gives your engagement playbook, it's slightly different than the company or a company that's doing more e-com, et cetera. So any thoughts from you on good crisis communications?
Yeah, I mean, mine is really just to build on what Karen and Alan have said. We're 50,000 restaurants around the world, 4 brands, and we have 2,000 franchisees that actually run 98% of our restaurants. So we're really a system within a system. So for us, the difference maker on crisis communications has always been a lot of scenario planning, a very clear protocol, so that we know what needs to escalate up to the parent company level, what needs to be handled at the global level, what needs to be handled at the market level, because at the end of the day, there's a crisis happening every day somewhere for us. And so we've done, over the last couple of years, a lot of training to ramp up our franchisees and our employees around that crisis protocol. And that paid off a lot when COVID hit, because I think, like a lot of companies, we were still, figuring out what kind of impact is this going to have on our business. We had the luck of having a pretty sizable Chinese business that in the very early stages of the crisis, they're ones that actually created contactless delivery that we're all now familiar with, the KFC and Pizza Hut leadership team there under Yum China. And so we were watching and looking at that situation very early on, even before, it started to spread and come into different places around the world. So because of our protocol, we were able to say, this one's a level 4, which is our red level, which means all hands on deck, like you were saying, Karen, CFO, CEO, head of HR, head of transformation, on down the line, marketing, ops. And for us, what we had was the brands actually mobilize at the brand level and really, went very fast and aggressively on understanding what's the impact on our stores. And so at the very beginning of this, they had really great ways of, understanding the impact that was happening, whether we had closures, whether we had employees that were affected. So that protocol to mobilize big global systems is really important. And then I think just, that allowed us to have very fast information flow through all the various different channels. So
fantastic. Love it. So whenever there's an issue that comes up, especially issues that affect broadly the economy, I'm always looking out for examples of companies doing it well and places to be educated by others who are doing great work. So let's talk a little bit about examples of other brands that you think do a great job with crisis communications. And maybe Carolyn would go in the other direction this time if we want to start with you.
Sure. Well, I've been dealing with a lot of things lately. So I'm going to use an example, our brands, actually. We've had lots of crises over the years, whether it was a supply chain or something happening in a restaurant or, fake news, et cetera. It's just when you work in a business where you're interacting with the public, you're going to always have something. I think one of the shining examples that we've had in the last couple of years is KFC in the UK. A couple of years ago, the team made a decision to change logistics, vendors, and changing from one vendor to the other, resulted in a shortage of chicken being supplied to restaurants where we need it. So it wasn't necessarily a supply issue for chicken, but it was more of a logistical issue. And essentially, much of the market was closed down. That team was just so amazing. They focused on very transparent, fast, communications to their franchisees, to their employees, and ultimately to customers, and I think the thing that really pushed them through doing it very well was they responded with, an ad, that just said, hey, we screwed up. You probably saw the example. It said FCK, we changed around the letters of KFC, right? And that was a challenging move for them, right? But they moved through it with honesty. They moved through it with fortitude and really transparency, and gave them permission to kind of build back things the way they needed to be in the business and with all of our stakeholders. So to me, that stands out as a shining example. I know there are others, but that's the one that comes to me at the moment.
Yeah, love that. Thank you for sharing that. It's always interesting. You see it in the headlines, but to hear a little bit of the background story behind the curtain is so interesting. Karen, what about for you? Who do you admire and follow?
God, I feel like, I'm a middle child. And so I feel like you're playing, I'm like being very triggered right now. So I am not going to throw any of my friends under the bus, because I always think with crisis comms, when you're in it, it looks very different than when you're out of it, and you always learn a lot of things. I think that we've handled the pandemic well, but I'm gonna throw a love line out to my home state of New York. And I think that the state of New York and Andrew Cuomo did just an absolutely awesome job with COVID communications. And maybe that's juxtaposed. I'm going to touch a third rail here of the way the US government communicated around COVID. But I found that I was really fascinated by the honesty, the authenticity, the really being out in front. It felt real, it felt honest, it felt consistent. And I think the state of New York did a really, really fantastic job. Yeah. Now, of course, I think that Yum Brands and HP and ServiceNow, I think everybody did a wonderful job. I mean, shit, I was getting emails from like a company that was selling me patio equipment. But, I just think that, seriously, it was like everybody was communicating about it. But, yeah. I was really surprised with this pandemic, and it was interesting. The level of humanity that really came out to demonstrate support, whether it was the number of companies that, delayed layoffs and continued to pay contingent workers. I think a lot of brands really tried their best to do this right with actions and not just words.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. When you were saying that, it was making me think about sometimes there are issues that affect a portion of companies or one company, and it can be scarier. Sometimes, especially big companies, are risk averse. So you're worried to pop your head up, or am I going to make it worse, or whatever it is. But this one, we were all in it together. And I wonder if that took some of the fear away from should we or shouldn't we? Should we err on the side of, and people just went for it, and they felt the permission and sort of the collective safety, because everyone was trying to do their very best for the greater good, which is beautiful to see. Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Karen. And Alan, over to you. Any additional thoughts to share, folks that you admire in the space?
Sure. Well, I'll just echo what you just said, Stacey. I think it's a major difference that we're all in this together. And I think, I hope as we come out of this that you'll see a sea change. There'll be a before COVID mindset, and an after COVID mindset that will be more transparent, more agile, more human. I'll echo all the comments that have been said. I do think it's about head and heart. These are emotional times. And so I think the best brands are communicating with transparency. They're communicating with heart. They're showing they care. Trust is so important, whether you're B2C or B2B. Trust is so important. You see a lot of great examples in the consumer world. You know, as Geraldine said, I enjoyed a Habit burger last night. And one thing that's great about Habit's response is they're very open. You'd go up to a Habit store here in the Bay Area and it's well marked. You understand exactly what to do. Everybody's adhering to that. So you just feel safe and confident going in there and getting your food and picking things up. And I think that's what matters. There's so much fear and anxiety and unknown in the world right now. And so the best brands are coming through with consistency and clarity, saying, here's what we understand, here's what we know you're concerned about, and here's what we're doing to take care of you and try to make sure you're safe and healthy. And in the B2B world, you know, we're doing the same thing in the way we communicate with our customers to make sure they understand we are there for them. You know, we're a platform company, so our customers rely on our uptime. They want to make sure our data centers are still secure and they have issues that we're there to support them. And so our version of that customer engagement is really leaning out to our customers, leaning into our customers, helping them understand that we're operating, we're here, you know, the same level of service that they've always gotten from us. They can continue to expect that. And we're also reaching out to our customers in industries that are suffering and struggling through this environment. How can we help you? You know, how do we think long-term and short-term? You know, we're doing a lot of work around applications that can help companies manage the response and help companies return to work in a safe and healthy manner now. And so I think it's the same themes regardless of what sector you're in, of over-communicate, be transparent, keep it human most of all, and show that empathy and show that concern and ultimately get a real conversation going, because that's what builds trust over time. And I think the best brands coming out of this will be the brands that build a deeper level of engagement and trust with their customer base.
Yeah. Well,
you know, Alan, I'll throw another example in there because I think that this was a really interesting one. And Geraldine, I think that you've had some experience with this too. An example of one that I was kind of fascinated by was Zoom. And I know that we're not on the Zoom platform right now, but I found the apology tour that Eric Yuan did really fascinating, because there are companies that have gotten it wrong. And I think that when you get it wrong and you self-correct, and you try and build back that trust in an authentic way, is really important, because that whole trust thing we always talk about in crisis, that if you lose that, you know, you're toast. It's just it's game over. So I do think that we're not always going to get it right, but I think being really fast to identify where we've made a mistake and self-correct is super important.
And I do think with that sense of humility, a little bit of humor, what KFC did. And I think that's part of the advantage of this global moment. We're all sharing the same fears and anxieties. And so just talk to me like a person. Don't talk to me like a company. Talk to me like a person.
Yeah. Love that.
Basically, the opportunity to take more risks, all of us being in the same situation. I mean, I think those of us that are on this call, we've managed these kind of issues for years, and we know the principles that we've been talking about. But what's been great is that you've been able to see how your peers are doing it, other companies and brands. And I just hope that as we move forward past kind of the crisis management, that we're still going to be able to come together, you know, as business to impact some of the changes that we'd like to see more proactively in terms of the communities that we're operating in, et cetera. So I think that's going to be really interesting as we move forward.
Yeah. So true. And just to echo Jennifer Mendez on the chat here, she was saying honesty and authenticity, it's so important in messaging. It can make or break your brand. So well said, Jennifer. That is so true. So one of the other companies, by the way, that I've been watching, and I just got the email from the CEO, is Peloton, a young company, growing, has been in the headlines for some things. But I feel that I'm seeing them. And on Black Lives Matter, they've just come out with a $100 million commitment, which they've broken down in detail. That when I read it, I thought, you are learning on your feet. You're a young organization. None of us get it right. They seem to be really trying hard to serve. And I respect that a lot. I'm going to continue to follow them on their journey. So speaking of Black Lives Matter, we talked a lot about COVID-19, but it would be interesting to hear your perspective as well in the context of the nationwide protests. What's going on with racial inclusion and systemic racism in particular the United States, but this is also a global topic of tremendous importance. So, and maybe just to democratize the order, Karen, we'll come to you first this time. You can have firstborn syndrome on this one.
You were feeling that I was getting jittery on that. You know, this one is, you know, talking about race is really tough, and talking about race in a corporate environment is even tougher. You know, thankfully we have you know, this is HP's history. We have a really strong position in diversity and inclusion and equal rights. But just today we published our annual sustainability report, the impact that we've had on, you know, people, planet, and community. And the one area in the report, I mean, among a lot of other great achievements, our numbers with Black and African American communities went down by 0.1%. And it's not a big number, but it's a number that we take really, really seriously. And we're taking maybe oversteering accountability on it, and, you know, pledge to increase our number of Black and African American executives by 2x by 2025. Doing what many brands are doing. We've hosted 2 really honest town halls, difficult town halls, where we've had employees on who have talked about the fact that they have been George Floyd, they have been face down on the ground. And these are senior people within our company, that this is not somebody out there. And I think we're doing what most companies are doing, which is trying to be real, trying to be authentic, trying to look hard in the mirror and make sure that while we think about driving systemic changes in the industry, that we start with ourselves. And that's been a big takeaway for us.
Absolutely. And I think what we say now always matters. What you do really matters. And this is an ultra marathon. Yeah. This is 10 ultra marathons. So I've been thinking a lot about, you know, this moment, but we all can help our organizations a month from now, 6 months from now, 12 months from now, keep the energy high, keep the focus high. And that's
this isn't signing on to an amicus brief. This is systemic racism. Right. And we're very clear that this is about the Black and African American community. That is the point of focus right now, and it can't let up until we, you know, as an industry, as a community, as a society, drive change.
Yeah, well said, Karen. Thank you. Alan, any thoughts to build on that, and also how you were showing up internal and external communication over the last couple of weeks at ServiceNow?
Yeah, we're doing a lot of the same things. Going back to our crisis management comments, our point of view is employee first. And so our efforts have been, you know, let's have the conversation inside our company. We've done some of the same things that Karen mentioned, town hall meetings, very raw, very real conversations. And most importantly, I think as a management team and what we've encouraged all our employees is this is a time to listen and not react. And this is about systemic structural racism. And so, you know, we've given our Black employees came forward and said, I want to talk. We gave them the voice. We gave them the stage, gave them the microphone, and just to hear their stories and try to understand it in a deeper way. And I think the challenge right now is these are not new issues, right? These are issues that have been plaguing the U.S. for 400 years. And they're certainly not new issues from a business diversity point of view. I have hope. It does feel like it's a different conversation this time. Mm-hmm. And so to your point, Stacey, I think the trick is what does it lead to? Does it lead to real change? You know, as Karen pointed out, this is true for us too. The tech industry has struggled with moving numbers for Blacks and underrepresented minorities. You know, that's been a big obstacle, a lot of inertia there. Hopefully things will start to change. I think all of the commitments that companies are making, the financial commitments, that's good. Money helps, but money's clearly not the only answer. I think the conversation is really important, because if it were just money, companies have made commitments before. I think this time, what may be different this time is a broader awakening of the systemic and structural issues that we're all responsible for. And that is not the burden of any one company, or certainly not the burden of Black employees in your company to solve. It's the burden of the leaders in the company to solve, and leaders in society. And so I think as we go through the next few years, I think that's what everybody will be watching for. Are we really tackling the structural and systemic issues in addition to all the other approaches that are needed and that make sense? But unless we really tackle the systemic issues, the structural racism, come to terms with that, both inside our organizations and in society at large, I don't think you'll see long-term fundamental change. So I'm hopeful, and I think the most powerful thing you can do in that from a communications point of view is have the conversation. The most powerful thing we can do as leaders is listen in a different way and try to forge a new direction as we go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And Geraldine, I'm going to come to you in one moment. I want to read a comment from Leilani Latimer. She'd love to see real, not politically correct, but real training on microaggression and unconscious bias. And she feels that would help a lot. I think that's a great point. And even personally, going through these trainings, probably 5 years ago was my first personal unconscious bias training. You know, it's like doing my annual sexual harassment training. I think I'm familiar, and gosh, was I wrong. That training helps. And it helps you to be self-reflective, because we all came up a certain way, and you can't have every single world, and therefore you can simply not have empathy for all the experience go through. So I think that's a great comment, that even though it feels like, oh, we're going to do training and maybe it's not meaningful, actually, my experience was it was meaningful, and it's part of what we should be doing. So Geraldine, wanted to come over to you to comment, and then I'm going to bring in a couple of questions from our 127 panel viewers.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think from a personal standpoint, you know, there are many reasons to be scared. There are many reasons to be disappointed. But I'm personally hopeful, and I'm grateful that there's the greater awareness of an issue that really affects every person. It doesn't matter what color you are, or what your background or ethnicity or sexual orientation or gender, like, we're all affected by racism in some way, right? It's just really an insidious cancer. I think from a Yum perspective, we have always been a people-focused company. We've got 1.5 million people working in the brands for our franchisees around the world. And so that's been our focus, you know, the whole time. So we've been thinking about how do we, you know, not only is racism on the US stage, but it's on the global stage as well. And racism is actually a global, you know, issue. So we've been thinking about how do we frame and have conversations across our entire global business, as well as in the US, right? You know, respecting that, you know, there's a different reality on the ground everywhere. And so we've really done what I call kind of shifted into deep listening mode. To Alan's point, where we've had lots of, you know, conversations in the US and around the world about what's ahead. And we actually have a lot of interest from outside the US on what are we going to be doing going forward. I'm really grateful. We have a new CEO, David Gibbs, who started at the beginning of the year. And last year, we started talking about our social purpose and what do we want to do to really, you know, ramp up, you know, our impact from a standpoint in communities. And with COVID, it's just a perfect storm, right? Like, we don't need COVID, but what's happening is we're very clear that the frontline employees are where it's at, right? Like, we, you know, don't have a business if we don't have frontline employees that we're supporting. So can't share all the details now, but we're looking at some, you know, pretty bold commitments that we're proud of, so that we can, you know, put them front and center and really give back in that way. I think what this, you know, the protests over the last couple months have allowed us to do is get clear on our values. We already knew our values: people first, believing in all people, but we re-clarified that we stand firmly against any kind of hate, discrimination, intolerance, and systemic racism. And we've committed to the organization that we're going to continue to champion unity. We're going to continue to champion opportunity in really specific ways, equity as well. And so that, you know, is an ongoing conversation that we're having now, in addition to the listening. What does that really mean? You know, what actions that are very specific are you going to take? And, you know, can't share a lot about that in this moment, but very soon. you should see an announcement from us around that. But we're really interested in being part of the solution, and it's just really an exciting time to be in this field, able to help our organization move forward into the new normal, which, who knew we were going to be dealing with this a year ago.
Yeah,
right.
I think one of the things that I thought was really interesting, and that I was fascinated by your answer, Geraldine. I had no idea that Yum Brands actually had that many employees. That's insane. That's like larger than a global economy. One of the things, to the point about unconscious bias and microaggression, this is one that we've been spending a lot of time talking about. We did a town hall that was focused on allies and figuring out if you want to be an ally, what does that mean? And one of them was people educating themselves, that it's not up to the Black and African American community to educate people about how they feel and what this means, but there's a lot of education that needs to happen, whether families, children, in the work environment, and so on, to help bring everybody, if you want to be an ally, what do you need to know? And microaggressions continue to come up as one of those main themes of something that happens all the time, that's constantly swept under the rug, particularly in a corporate environment that makes companies not be a safe culture and a safe environment for many underrepresented groups. And so I would draw like a big line under that one of something that we all need to spend a lot more time on.
Yeah, it's almost like there needs to be a new version of the unconscious bias.
Yeah.
A little bit more.
Yeah.
Because people as human beings do microaggressions all the time, whether or not it's race related. It's like part of our DNA.
Yes.
Know? So it's like, then what we're talking about are these specific microaggressions, targeted towards a certain group that you maybe feel empowered to do. But it's like, people should just know what microaggressions are, period. Right?
Yeah, I agree.
And Stacey, I'll add just two other thoughts. One, these are very tough, complicated issues to deal with and talk about in the business world and in society at large. They're doubly hard in the U.S. this year in an election year. And one of the big challenges I think we all have as communication leaders is to make sure that we can continue the conversation without it becoming overly partisan and political. Yeah. And I think there's risk that companies will shut down the conversation because of that, because it does start to feel political, and that's a tough thing to navigate right now. But I think it's one of our responsibilities as communication leaders to help our broader leadership team navigate that and understand that, because as we've said, these are tough, raw conversations in and of themselves. They don't have to be hyper-partisan political conversations. And I do think there's some risk that in the second half of the year, we'll see companies pulling back a little bit because it feels too controversial in the election year in this country. And so I think that's a watch out for us as communication leaders. And also I'll add, I've been very fortunate in my career to work for consumer brands that have been deeply committed to diversity, going back 30 years now in my career. And it's always, to me, my lesson is it's always about leadership. Real change happens when leadership at the top is deeply committed and lives it and acts it and works it every day. And it is hard work. And I've also seen how quickly companies can backslide when leadership changes. And so again, I think as communications people and leaders in our own organization, really making sure the conversation continues, that there's forward momentum, will be part of the way this becomes a real difference. This time, this becomes a real inflection point, and we start to see real change over time. But I think it requires day in, day out leadership and rolling up your sleeves and doing the hard work. Mm-hmm. This got to be a movement, not a moment, right? That's what we're saying inside our company and what we're hearing from our employees. Is this just going to be another moment and we move on, or is this going to be a real inflection point and a real movement toward long term?
And here's the thing: it's not a communications problem. So we started with crisis communications. You can't communicate your way out of this. And I think, one thing that I'm always super clear on is, as each of us leads communications functions, we can create the most incredible poetry and speeches and policy statements and so on. Yeah. But you got to draw the line that the actions have to be there to back it up. The way that you communicate about it is the last mile. You got to have the hard work. And that's one thing that I'm really, really conscious of, and making sure that, it isn't just about beautiful writing and creating great, LinkedIn posts and so on. It's about not doing those things. It's about, like asking the hard questions and not communicating until there's actually truly something differentiated to say.
I'm going to try to bring in the audience here a couple of thoughts. And by the way, I think our job in this field is not to talk about what we're doing. It's being the conscience of the organization to make sure we are doing the right things. The truth better be good. So let me just bring in some of the audience thoughts here. Adisha Barnett said, hi, everybody. In my opinion, we have to acknowledge that aggression, I know, she's amazing, and real trauma are also inflicted on Black employees every day in corporate America. Ultimately, leaders should focus on leading with compassion and empathy, and companies must bring forward anti-racism policies in order to address systemic racism as it comes forward in our companies. Thank you to the panelists for being real on this. Thank you to all of you, and Disha, thank you so much for your comment. A couple of other thoughts here, and I wish we had more time because we're wrapping up in just 2 minutes to go. Some great questions about town halls and how to do that tactically well. Hosting them, so that would be a good follow-up topic, because it is, as many of you said, it's a hard thing to do well, although if tremendous transparency and kind of honesty, and then that's really a great place to start. And I think now everyone is doing them digitally because we can't get together with COVID, which is also a new way to try to have those types of conversations. Fernanda mentioned that so many companies are committed to expanded hiring, and someone was mentioning doubling the representation of people of color in their leadership ranks, et cetera. How do you make sure, or maybe stating it as more declaratively, we must make sure that these employees know their value and they don't feel like a diversity hire? And I quite a bit about that in the hallways organizationally, and it's something we need to talk about openly and figure out how do we navigate that, because I do think that's on a lot of minds. So Fernanda, thank you for mentioning that. Here, someone said, you can't communicate your way out of this. I need that on a t-shirt. And someone else said, I would buy that t-shirt. So someone please make that t-shirt. So let's go. We got 60 seconds left. So I would love for each of the panelists to leave us with their final thought. And sorry, this wasn't on the approved list. One thing that you learned from the last couple of months, and just popcorn in whoever would like to go first to share a final thought on learnings for the group.
Keep it real, keep it human. I mean, the power of that has been amplified and magnified 1,000 times for me over the past couple of months.
Love it.
I just think, we've had so much. Somebody said that, this situation where all of us are at home has kind of democratized roles, because everybody is right there on the screen, needs to share an opinion. And that has been so helpful. And it's like, to the extent that we, change our work situations going forward, it'd be great if companies could keep that in mind, right? Like, how do you democratize opportunities and make sure everybody has a voice and a seat at the table? And I think that really is very appropriate for the context around diversity and inclusion and equity.
Yeah. Right. And Karen with the final word.
I've learned the importance of empathy. I think in the fast-paced world that we all live in, and as managers and leaders, it's all about more, do it faster. And I've learned how to slow down a little bit, and especially on Zoom, looking people in the eye and listening to them and taking the time to hear about people's families and the issues with their children home and educating their families. And I've just learned how to slow it down a little bit and have more compassion.
Nice. Beautiful. Well, thank you all so much for being generous with your time. And thank you to everyone who joined and who was commenting. What a rich dialogue. We're truly appreciative. And our time is up. So we will send you back into the other sessions and wish you a great digital conference. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, you guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Joey.
Bye, Ellen. Take
Bye.
care.